Imagine a quiet winter afternoon in the city. People are walking to work, trains rattling overhead, and then a deep, deafening roar echoes through the streets. A massive, towering wave of dark liquid rounds the corner, moving at 35 miles an hour, crushing everything in its path. A deadly tidal wave of dessert syrup sounds like something out of a cartoon, but this actually happened. The date was January 15th, 1919. We are in the North End of Boston. At the time, this was a dense, heavily populated working-class neighborhood filled with immigrants, bustling factories, and freight yards. History's strangest tragedies rarely strike empty landscapes. They erupt in the middle of ordinary life, catching people completely off guard. Looming directly over the neighborhood was an enormous steel storage tank owned by the Purity Distilling Company. It stood 50 feet tall, 90 feet wide, and held over 2.3 million gallons of thick, heavy molasses. In the early 20th century, molasses was a vital commodity. It was a staple food sweetener, but also fermented in huge quantities to manufacture industrial alcohol, a core component in wartime munitions. The structure holding it all, however, was clearly failing. Long before the disaster, local residents could see dark streaks of syrup weeping from the seams between the heavy steel plates. The leaks were so consistent that the hazard simply blended into daily life. Neighborhood children would regularly walk up to the giant tank with cups and sticks to scrape off the dripping syrup for a free treat. Employees at the facility noticed the alarming groans of shifting metal, immediately reporting the severe seepage to their superiors. The company's primary response was to paint the tank brown, blending the leaks into the background rather than fixing the structural flaws. The normalization of these leaks effectively masked the danger, allowing a visible structural warning to remain a ticking time bomb in the middle of a city street. At roughly 12:40 p.m., the metal finally gave way. Witnesses reported a sound like machine gun fire as the steel rivets popped off, followed by a thunderous boom as the tank violently ruptured. 2.3 million gallons of heavy syrup collapsed outward all at once. The resulting wave crested at an estimated 25 feet high, roaring through the narrow streets far faster than anyone could possibly run. This material weighed roughly 12 pounds per gallon, much denser than water. The sheer kinetic force of the impact snapped trees in half, overturned freight cars, and crushed entire buildings into splinters. The mass of the wave was so great that it warped the heavy steel columns supporting the nearby elevated railway, obliterating the infrastructure and nearly bringing a passing train down into the flooded streets below. The impact functioned as a massive kinetic event, delivering enough force to physically wipe several city blocks off the map in seconds. Once the initial kinetic surge settled, a secondary horror began. The entire area was coated in a waist-deep layer of thick, rapidly cooling molasses. For the people caught in the wreckage, survival required immense physical exertion. The freezing January air caused the syrup to harden, turning the streets into a massive trap where every attempt to move required pulling against a heavy, suffocating vacuum. First responders rushing to the scene faced impossible terrain. Doctors, police, and volunteers found themselves wading through a thick brown mire that pulled at their boots and stalled their vehicles. The viscosity of the molasses meant that rescuers often became immobilized themselves. Attempting to pull someone out of the wreckage meant fighting against a substance that firmly held on to everything it touched. The physical properties of the syrup turned a straightforward search and rescue mission into an agonizing, exhausting fight against the very ground they walked on. In the aftermath, investigators faced a critical question. How does a stationary steel container fail with enough explosive force to destroy a neighborhood? This cross-section of the tank reveals the first fatal flaw. The steel walls were simply too thin to safely hold the weight of 2.3 million gallons of dense liquid. Furthermore, it was never properly tested with water before being rushed into service. To make matters worse, Boston's fluctuating winter temperatures caused the metal to expand and contract, placing extreme thermal fatigue on the already weakened rivets and steel plates. Inside that compromised shell, a molasses was fermenting. This chemical process produced carbon dioxide, which became trapped, steadily increasing the internal gas pressure until the structure could no longer hold. The tank did not fail by chance. It collapsed because the basic mathematics of structural engineering and fluid dynamics were completely ignored. The Great Molasses Flood sounds like a strange historical anomaly, but the root cause is deeply familiar. 21 people died because clear physical warnings were dismissed in the name of profit and convenience. Today, the North End is quiet, rebuilt, and peaceful. But the same industrial pressures that caused a steel tank to tear open in 1919 still exist around the world. It forces us to look at the infrastructure surrounding us and ask, what other invisible hazards are we walking past every single day, assuming that someone else has checked the math? We often expect history to be serious and logical. But occasionally, reality delivers a disaster so strange it sounds impossible, leaving behind a devastating lesson written in twisted steel. If this dive into one of history's most unusual events changed how you see the world, click the like button and subscribe for more stories exploring the realities behind the headlines.